All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's Tiny webinar. We have a special one today. I'm joined by Samuel Duggan, Senior Customer Success Associate for TINYpulse, and Dr. Laura Voiles, People Scientist for TINYpulse, expert in industrial organizational psychology. Today, we're going to learn about the new engagement survey that's coming out from TINYpulse, but more importantly, what are you doing to get the most important insights from your engagement data? So if you're not using TINYpulse, these concepts will apply just because we will go through questions, the very best questions that you can be asking your employees to get a sense as to holistically how engaged they are. And then number two is the key drivers that are driving engagement within your organization. So if it's manager effectiveness, if it's compensation and benefits, it's not always the same thing. And you know, they say going after two rabbits, often you catch none. So how can you prioritize your actions? So I'm joined today by Sam and Dr. Voiles, who will kick it off today. If you do have questions, drop them in the Q&A or drop them in the chat. Love to hear where you're from. We'll add to the chatter there. And before we jump away, do not forget to take that post-session survey. I'd love to hear from you. All right, Sam, Dr. Voiles, take it away for us. What are we going to learn today?
Yeah, I first of all, I just always love doing any sort of interview or any sort of thing with Andrew, because I always pick up one or two more catchphrases to add to my repertoire. So that two rabbit thing I'm gonna have to remember from now on. But yes, what we are going to learn today is, first of all, we're going to talk about the new engagement survey, why we changed it and how we got to where we are. We're going to talk a little about the science and the math behind it, why we think it's now the best survey available instead of the baseline, which some of you, if you've launched this recently, might be familiar with, but also why it comes to that decision to make that change to the new engagement survey. We're also going to dive into KDA, which is key driver analysis. To Andrew's point, why is it important? How are we going to use that to better, formulate ideas and how best to figure out and focus on different aspects of your company and your culture to make your employees more engaged and happier. We're also going to do a little quick demo, show off how to get that new engagement survey up and running in your organization, and also how to look at the responses, as well as all the data and graphs that's going to come along with it after the responses that come through. And finally, close the Q&A. As Andrew did mention, please feel free to add any questions as we go. This will be fully recorded as well, so you'll be able to access it after the webinar. So yeah, I'm just really excited to get jumping into this. And of course, the first thing we need to talk about is, what is engagement? So obviously we have a few different ways of describing it, but I think Dr. Laura Voiles is the best way to describe it right now.
Sure. So in employee engagement, what we're really talking about is three different components. So one of the big things in psychology is that we think about emotions, cognitions, and behavior. It applies to a variety of psychology theories. And so we're applying this to employee engagement. And what this means is, with emotions, it's how your employees are feeling. Cognitions is what your employees are thinking. And then behavior, it's what your employees are doing. So as an example, emotions can relate to, for example, how your employees feel engaged or feel excited about their work. Cognitions is them thinking about and being invested in their work. And then behaviorally engaged is actually, intending to stay in that position and intending to continue to working in that way. So really, we kind of talk about it, the head and the heart and the action. And so we found a lot of benefits, and there's a ton of research even before us that has found a lot of benefit in employee engagement. It goes beyond just employee satisfaction, and it helps with having profitability in your organization. It also helps with retaining your employees. So, and there are these key drivers that can really impact your engagement, and that's what we are getting at with our engagement survey.
Sorry, thank you so much for covering that, Laura. So now we've kind of defined it, we need to figure out how do we put that into the TINYpulse program and how do we put that into our TINYpulse engagement strategy. So this engagement survey, it's essentially a diagnostic survey where we're going to figure out key areas to focus on what's affecting your engagement and how can we improve them. And this is kind of a little bit of a foreshadowing towards our progress plans, which we'll be covering next week, as Andrew's mentioned. But once we have diagnosed it, we're able to now take action and then measure improvement. When we think about this as a full strategy, as a 12-month cycle, we're going to do that diagnostics survey. We're going to figure out areas of focus on. We're going to then do further surveys to focus on that areas and measure improvement as we, outside of TINYpulse, within the culture, within the organization, make those incremental changes. And that's the real idea behind this engagement strategy, and one of the reasons why the engagement survey was created. So, talk a little bit about the engagement strategy. So what is a diagnostic survey, Laura?
A diagnostic survey essentially lets you assess where your workforce and where your employees are at currently. So it lets you look at a variety of different topics and how your employees are doing in terms of really important outcomes. So those outcome questions really kind of define and quantify a topic. So it might be looking at how engaged your employees are, how long they intend to stay in your workforce. And then these driver questions are things that impact your employee engagement and impact whether your employees intend to stay or voluntarily turn over. So to put it simply, a diagnostic survey gives you the lay of the land before kind of taking a more targeted approach.
And I think this goes into show that, correct, Laura?
It does, yeah. So when we are thinking about, diagnostic surveys, we could, for example, administer an employee engagement survey. And this would look at the science-backed engagement index as well as the drivers. And we'll get into more details in that in a moment. But it helps you diagnose and determine, is there an area where employees are rating lower than other areas or compared to benchmarks within your industry? And this key driver analysis will help you determine the relationship between these key drivers and important outcomes. I believe I saw a question, I think, related to this. Will we be sharing an example? Yeah, actually in several different ways. We will be doing a demo to actually show you the account and what it looks like. We'll also show you examples of results using this engagement survey, so you can get an idea of how it all looks. But essentially, when you're diagnosing, you're putting together this employee engagement survey, and then you're examining the data, you're analyzing it, and you're getting these insights. Luckily for you, we do it through the TINYpulse platform, so you don't have to go through all the work of actually doing the data analysis. The work is done for you.
Awesome. And I think that's a great point that Laura's just made. One thing we've heard a lot from you guys, I am a customer success associate, so I've already recognized a lot of my own customers on the call already. So you've done this data dive with me where you've gone through your responses. We've figured out ways to improve your own engagement, but also areas to focus on. And the whole idea with the engagement survey and KDA is that we're able to maybe automate that a little bit. And with good science and good math and good data, allow you to feel a bit more confident in the areas you are choosing to focus on. And that's kind of what the new engagement survey is. So as Laura did just mention and kind of hint to, it's broken into two different parts. The engagement index, which are 5 questions, which are measured together to give you a overall score, which we call the engagement index, to essentially measure how engaged the organization is as a whole. Then there's 15 questions, which we're calling key driver questions. These are to show you different categories, subcategories, key drivers that are affecting that engagement. And we're also going to measure them in terms of which is most impactful and which is least impactful, to give you areas to focus on and give you areas to improve on as well. And this is one of the reasons why we have moved from baseline to this new engagement survey. Overall, the math and science is just a lot more better, a lot better. We've researched it, tested it. Dr. Laura Voiles, as well as 2 other colleagues, have been involved in creating this. And it has high validity and high reliability. And I didn't really know what that meant when I first saw it, so I had to ask Laura. But essentially, validity means what you're measuring is what you think you are measuring. while reliability is that when you measure the outcome over and over again, oops, come forward the slide accidentally. When you're measuring the outcome over and over again, you're going to get the same response each time. That's a really, really great use, I think, for you guys as well as for me as a CSA, is that when we do these engagement surveys, we're going to know areas to focus on. We're going to trust those areas that we need to focus on them. And that wasn't really what we were getting from the baseline. The baseline was more, it's very light diagnostically. We only had one question per category. You might remember those 15 questions. And, you know, it was really more so what you thought you're getting out of it. It was hard to do a deep dive with the data you're receiving. And that's all stuff we're fixing with this new engagement survey. So we've talked a little bit about KDA and why it is important, especially with this new engagement survey. We're going to dive into a little bit more now as well.
Hey, Sam, could we pause for just a moment? I actually wanted to discuss the poll results, although now the polls disappeared. There it is. Yeah, just to kind of get a sense. So we asked on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your ability to measure employee engagement overall? As you know, before we asked a question about, how easy it is to survey and ask questions of your employees. Usually that's kind of the easier thing to do. This is really where you get into the tough part. And so we asked this question and we found that 11% said not well at all. And then 17% said a 2, which is basically a little bit better than not well at all. But the majority, 50% of the responses responded with a 3. So they're kind of, they can get their bearings, but they're not quite there. And then we have the magical 11% wizard level. So what's actually beautiful about this data too is it's a perfect kind of distribution where the majority of the responses are in the middle. So it sounds like there's some room for improvement. And we'd love to tell you about one way to kind of make it a little bit easier.
Yes, absolutely. Good catch. I didn't even see that survey pop up. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah. And we're also getting some awesome comments like this one from Denise, which says that, while you might have the data from the survey, the interpretation isn't as easy. And that's absolutely true. It's also time consuming in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And that's a big pain point, especially just being a CSA, that we hear from a lot of you guys, is that when we sit down and actually review some of your data, a lot of it is sometimes feeling like guesswork, and we always come back with maybe we need to run more surveys. Now with this new engagement index, the 15 key drivers, we're able to take some of that heavy lifting off your shoulders, and with the research be able to actually present some things that we can see have high impact, low impact, what needs to be maintained, what needs to be celebrated, and what needs to be worked on as well. Okay, see, this is why there's 2 of us on this webinar, because if I miss something, Laura's going to pick it up for me.
Yeah, so while we introduce the analyses and everything, there's also a poll question that you can complete that's asking about your ability to really distill the most important insights from your data. So, how able are you to kind of get this information from the data that you've gathered? So while you're thinking on that, I'll tell you a little bit about key driver analysis, which and for short is KDA. Basically, KDA helps you pinpoint the problem. When you get your data back, you might see like lower averages for certain questions, but it's hard for you to know which one of those things is most meaningful for impacting outcomes that matter to you and your organization. So things like retention. And so organizations can really kind of save time by figuring out what initiatives quickly they should focus on. And that's what the KDA really gets at. And we've developed this to look at the impact of individual key drivers. So, and by key drivers, I simply mean simple questions in certain subcategories. So for example, one key driver is my manager provides clear goals for our group. And as you can see, that's rated as having a high impact. I'll talk more about the math and science behind that in a moment, but essentially we're going to give you a nice visual of kind of what the impact level is of each of these survey questions. Looking at the poll results, it looks like nobody feels that they could teach a course on it. Yeah. It's okay. Like teaching is the highest level of having learned something, so that's okay. We've got about 26% who can, do it. It's pretty good, but it takes some time. We have 24% where it's win some, lose some. We get it sometimes, sometimes we don't. And then we have 38% who say it's a lot of work and we don't always get it. And then 12% who just say we really need a lot of help. No worries. This is something that is difficult, and like many of you identified, it's time consuming. Some organizations, especially when you have an expert doing it, even then it takes months to develop the KDA. We took months to develop these survey questions and then to test them statistically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm trying to advance the slide. Oh, there it goes. Oh, goodness. Now it advanced all of them. Hold on. Let me go back.
We're just so excited about the KDA. We really want to jump in as much as we can.
Yeah, it was like not advancing, and then it advanced 3. Okay. So, oh, goodness. Now it went back the other way. So first, let me tell you about the math once the slides catch up with me. Maybe it might work better if you do it, Sam, since you're the original.
Let me give it a try.
Okay, I'll let go. We need to go back.
What ship doesn't have 2
captains? There we
go.
Right here. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me tell you about the math behind KDA. So we're basically marrying science and math for this key driver analysis. And what we used is a correlation technique called Kendall's Tau C. What's nice is this one's a little bit more kind of able to handle smaller sample sizes. And what it looks at is it's looking at the relationship between each key driver and each outcome. So for example, the manager giving us feedback or giving us clear goals. Let's say, yeah, manager giving us clear goals, and then it looks at the outcomes such as, I intend to stay with this organization. So it would look at those two and look at the connection between them. And you would say that they have a positive correlation if as one goes up, the other one does as well. So for example, my manager gives us clear goals. I intend to stay with this organization. Those two things would be tied positively. And with Kendall's Tau C, it's really examining kind of that rank order correlation. And what we're most interested in is called the correlation coefficient, which looks at the strength. And it can range all the way from -1, if it's a negative correlation, to +1. And +1 indicates an exact correlation to where if somebody put a 5 on my manager gives us clear goals, you could know almost certainly that they would also have given a 5 on I intend to stay with this organization. So it kind of tells you how much overlap there is. If you know what they've answered on one question with a correlation, you can kind of guess with a little bit of certainty how they would have answered on another. And it shows you the connection between those variables. Whereas if you asked a completely unrelated question, like I like ice cream or something unrelated, it wouldn't be correlated at all with their intention to stay in the organization. Unless maybe as an organization that like makes ice cream, but that's beside the point. So really to get this for the customers, we look at that correlation coefficient. And if we find that there's a lower connection, then we'd say this isn't something that you want to focus on as much because it doesn't impact those outcomes as much. But if we find it's a high impact, like this is the key driver that really impacts whether your employees are going to want to stay or leave. So that would be like a correlation coefficient of like 0.7. That's a really strong correlation. And that's where we would rank it as having really high impact. Okay, I'll try to advance the slides now. See if it cooperates.
See.
Next, we'll talk about the science. Or maybe I'll let you do it, Sam, because it doesn't seem to let me as much.
Yeah. There we go.
There it goes. Okay, yeah. So talking about the science, I want to kind of fill you in with how we developed this survey. So the most important thing is that you first want to define those concepts. And that's what's really behind the validity. As Sam mentioned, validity is measuring what you intend to measure. So are we measuring employee engagement? We did a ton of research into all of the scholarly studies involving employee engagement. We came up with a clear definition, developed questions, and then we crafted this survey, and we also had subject matter experts examine it. And then next, we wanted to look at the connection between those items and the outcomes. So we sent out test surveys. We tested this on huge samples. We sent out tons of surveys to many different groups on things like Amazon, Mechanical Turk, as well as SurveyMonkey. And then we analyzed the results to examine the reliability. So an example of reliability would be if we know that respondents kind of gave a certain response to one question, with reliability prediction, we can also guess that they would have responded similarly to a similar question. And so that's how you can kind of establish that reliability. We also looked at validity, so looking at how these items overlapped with the predicted outcomes. And then we also removed any bad questions. So we started with a huge bank of questions, and not all of them made the cut. And so we revised in order to give you the best engagement survey. And then lastly, we wanted to kind of check once we had our refined version of the survey, we checked with our stakeholders. We talked with customers, and we wanted to see, is this something that fits with your organization? We talked with business leaders to make sure that this would have important implications for them. So that's the science behind it. And this is something that was done over the course of many months, and with the combination of myself and 2 other industrial organizational psychologists. Sam, I'll let you advance the slide.
Okay. So now we've kind of defined a little bit, we have to figure out who has access to it. And there's a little bit of reasons why not everyone's going to have access straight off the bat. So it's live for any account who has over 75 active users. And I really want to stress the active users part, because I know a lot of our more recent customers have bought 75 seats as a minimum, but maybe don't have those all filled out. And for them, KDA was not going to be live by default. And there's a reason why we've done this, is because we need to have at least 30 responses per survey to be accurate when we look at the science and the data behind it. The big thing we're really looking for is about 70% response rate in a survey, just so that we can trust that the sample data is statistically accurate and that the KDA will be as representative as possible. That's also why when we recommend that you are sending out a KDA survey, it has to surely include about 50 to 60 minimum recipients, simply so we can hit that 30 responses per survey minimum and also get close to that 70% response rate that we're really, really looking for, so that we can trust and feel very confident in the KDA that we're getting.
Yeah, and essentially there's a really good reason for this. If you don't have enough responses, what will happen is you'll have really low statistical power. And when you have that low statistical power, you'll find that all of your relationships between key drivers and outcomes will not be significant. And it's not because there's nothing happening there in your organization. It's really because we don't have enough data yet to make those predictions. And so it's really important. Oh, I see a question. What do we do if we only have 8 responses? This is from Tammy. Great question. I would say first look at the size of your organization. If you have enough so that you can get at least 30 responses, I would say go ahead and remind your employees and encourage them to complete the survey. That way you can access KDA. Really, we want 50 to 60. So if you have at least that many employees, that would be a good sign. And then that's how you can get access to the KDA. I would suggest also talking to your customer success manager so that they can help walk you through this. But if you have enough employees and you just aren't getting those responses, I think things like incentives could be really helpful for making sure that you get that data. That was an excellent question.
Yes, and just a second, Dr. Boyles there as well. If you do not meet that 75 seat active user minimum, but you are interested in looking into KDA and seeing if it's something that can be turned on for your org and something that your org can use, I would suggest reaching out to your customer success manager or customer success associate if you are one of my customers, and we can sit down and have a discussion and see if there's a way we can make it work for you. I see 2 new questions did just come in from Praga and from Cheryl, both of them saying that they are under 30 essentially, and asking will this be active for them. Default, no, and also just because we are looking for that 30 responses minimum per survey, it may not yet work for you. That's not saying it might not work in the future, but for the very moment, to Dr. Boyle's point, we need it to be statistically accurate and make sure that the data you're receiving, you feel very confident in, and which is why we have that 30 user minimum for responses. But to Dr. Boyle's point, we'd prefer more 50, 60 responses too.
But let me be clear, you'll still have access to the engagement survey itself, so you still get those great insights. It's just with statistics, and this is regardless of what area you're doing these statistics in, you need to have a pretty good sample size in order to get meaningful results. And so if you have, let's say, only 15 employees responding to the survey, you're not able to really make those conclusions because you need that consistency of the data and you need enough kind of data points to be able to say, yes, there is a pattern. If it's too small, you can't kind of conclusively determine that there's a pattern or any statistical significance. So that's the downside. Oh, Sam, could we see the slides again?
Your slides are- there we go.
Okay, yeah. So that's the downside, but you would have access to the engagement survey and you'll still have the insights in terms of looking at the means and you still get to be able to compare with benchmarks. You just don't get the kind of highlights that KDA would give you.
Cool. I hope that answered some of those questions, but again, you all have CSMs and CSAs who are more than willing and very, very excited to discuss this with you. So if you have any further questions about this stuff and who can access it and how we can get it turned on for you, if you don't meet that 75 active user minimum, but you do think this could be very useful for you and you do believe you can get that 30 responses or 70% response rate, please again, reach out. We're more than happy to have that conversation with you and see how we can assist. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about key drivers and engagement surveys. So let's kind of jump into them a little bit more. So again, the real reason we have these key drivers, and there are 15 questions within the 20 question engagement survey, is because we want you to feel really, really confident in the data you're receiving and the outcomes you're receiving on that too. And these 15 key drivers, what we've actually done is we've gone through and actually grouped them into 7 different categories. We're going to get into them a little bit in the future and in a few more slides. But what we really want is you to spend less time analyzing your data, which you've already all pointed out is a bit of a pain for you, but also feel very confident in what the data you are receiving and that you can take action and then measure that change and be confident that if you take action correctly, there will be change when these key driver questions come back around again, and also when your engagement questions come back around again. Cool. So let's see what we got here. So this is something that's going to probably look or sound very familiar all to you. So the manual diagnosis, very painful. You might invest in the wrong thing, which I've heard from many of my admins is a huge concern for them, that they've done a baseline survey or they've done some form of self-diagnostic survey and taken away the wrong outcome. Maybe they go 6 months down the road chasing that outcome and it turns out it wasn't the main issue. And that's one of the things that KDA is trying to combat it. So you feel confident that the outcome you're chasing or the feedback you're receiving is the right one to chase down to affect your engagement score. You don't need a data scientist now because it's automated in the platform. So you don't even need to lift a finger, which I know if talking to my admins will be very happy about. And there's no long wait time for analysis. It's real time. So it's very fast to make reports and recommendations. And again, once we hit that 30 responses or the 70% response rate, you can jump in even while the question is still live and active and actually see what those KDAs look like. And as well as they update, the data will become stronger and stronger. And to Dr. Voil's point, the statistics will become more significant as well. So we've talked a little bit, or talked a lot about the engagement index. So here, let's actually show you the questions. So again, the index is the average of these 5 engaged outcome questions. And these questions are supposed to cover the emotion, the cognitive and behavioral investment users and workers feel in their work. And together, when we group these together, we get a score on how engaged the audience is. So you can see here in front of you, a lot of these questions might look familiar, but how happy are you at work being our staple, our big one. You can probably rest TINYpulse's brand on that question itself. But the averages of these to get the engagement questions are then going to be followed up by the 15 key driver questions that are going to show different impact scores, different impact scores for the different key drivers and how they're affecting the overall engagement index, which again is the average of these 5. So this is where we're going to have a bit of memory around numbers. So there's 15 key drivers and they're rolled up into 7 science-based categories. And I'll be showing you the key drivers in just a moment, but I did want to show you, first of all, what these 7 categories are, because when we go to review the responses and the KDA, we're actually able to break down those responses through these 7 categories. So if there's something you wanted to really focus in on and look at, these 7 categories will be the way for you to do so. We've got personal resources, empowered work environment, communication, effective management, benefits and pay satisfaction, growth and development, and then health and wellness. Some of these may sound familiar. We do have some categories similarly aligned, but these 7 science-based categories really just include the 15 key drivers.
And just to add on to that, these 7 categories were developed based on previous scholarly research. So these have been shown for years through the research that they impact key outcomes for organizations, including employee happiness, their engagement in their work, and their intention to stay.
Awesome. So each key driver has its own question, but what I've done here is I've just included the key driver just to make a little bit less words for you to look at, and also shown you which of those 7 science-backed categories they fall under. So of course, for personal resource, resilience, and self-efficacy, communication is all about information flow. Empowered work environment, that autonomy, meaningfulness, and then effective management, clear goals, gives feedback, and recognition. For the last 3, we have pay satisfaction and benefit satisfaction under benefits and pay satisfaction. Should be easy enough for us to remember. We also have training and procedural justice falling under growth and development. And finally, safety, organizational support, and workload rolling under health and wellness. So again, these are the 15 key drivers. They're not the questions themselves. They are just the KDA or the KDA, key drivers, and what of the 7 categories they fall under. If you are curious to see what those questions are, well, you're kind of in luck because the next part is the demo itself. So before I jump into the demo, I do want to pause right now and just see if any questions about stuff we've just shown you about the key drivers before we show you what it looks like in app, as well as any other questions about anything we've shown you so far. I'm also just going to stop sharing my screen while I pull that demo up and we wait for some questions to roll in. Okay, going once. Oh, here we go. There we go. All right. So we have.
I'll take that question. Okay. Where did I see it? I just saw one. Okay, actually, I saw 2 questions. So to what extent, this is from Lindsay, can you customize the engagement survey and still conduct KDA analysis?
Great question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I would discourage you from making any changes that influence the meaning of the item. So you don't want to change it to the extent that the meaning of what you're measuring is changing, because we have tested this statistically and we've made sure that there's a connection between those key drivers and the outcomes. What you could do, for example, though, is you could, like in some places we might say in the organization as part of the item. So communication in the organization is clear, for example, and instead of in the organization, you could change it to the name of your organization without changing the meaning of the item. But anything beyond that, I would say I would discourage you from changing too much, because then it changes the relationship between that key driver and the outcome. I saw one other quick question, which was about
Dr. Bowles, really quickly. I will say for anyone who's used TINYpulse in the past, I would say normal question rules apply, which is, to your point, we're not changing what the question is asking, but if you do want to put it into your own words and such, like, personalize it to your organization by including your organization's name or company name, totally fine. But because these are science-backed questions and the data is going to be something we're going to represent on and also make decisions on, we don't want to change the questions too much, because these are science-backed questions that have got a lot of research put into them, a lot of trial and error. We don't want to change them too much.
Yep. And then I saw a quick question just asking for clarification about procedural justice. Procedural justice is one of the types of justice that we look at in the organization, and it refers to employees feeling that the processes for making decisions are fair. So, for example, they feel that the decisions about whether they get a promotion or not, they feel that that process is fair. That's what that's really looking at. What else do we have? I think I saw one or a couple more.
More.
How can we use this to support a prior survey, or is that not possible? Um, Denise, I'm not sure of like what you're looking to do in terms of that. I think what you could do is, for example, you could look at what you found in your previous surveys and then look at what you find in this and see if there are patterns. That could be something that's really meaningful in terms of tying them together. That's one way, but if you are thinking of another way, let me know and drop it in the chat.
Mhm.
And then Lindsay asked if we can add items.
I think that's going to go back to well, I just mentioned previously, which is general survey rules are going to apply. And if you've used TINYpulse with us in the past, what we normally talk about is if we have a pre-built template, normally you could add in extra questions as usual. But again, because this is science-backed surveys, we don't really want to add any more questions in. And also the questions you add in may not be KDA friendly, especially if you're making them yourselves. So we would we would advise against doing so, especially if you're running your first one. We would normally say use it straight out of the box to see what kind of responses you get. Again, you can change and edit some of the questions to include your company name if that is a concern for you, or if that's something you're used to doing. But I wouldn't necessarily, especially for your first go around, include any other questions or remove or edit any questions beyond changing maybe our organization to insert company name.
One thing I would recommend though is, Lindsay, if you have some questions that you're really interested in asking, you could also do them through a pulse survey. So if there's a question you really want to know, you could do a quick pulse instead that's separate from the organization. And yes, Lorraine, sorry you have to leave early, but we will have a recording of this so that you can get it and check out the demo after the fact. Yeah, no problem. Sam, are we ready for the demo?
I'm all ready. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Let's do it.
So for those of you who use TINYpulse, this is going to look very, very familiar. This is, of course, your Engage admin view. So this is the admin view for TINYpulse and the Engage one in particular. So just as usual, when we go to add a new survey in, we would go to surveys, and then we can either go to manage surveys to add it that way, or this is a neat trick for those of you not in the know, we can go to content library, then to our templates, and then find the template we're trying to send out. Obviously, in this example, the template we're trying to send out is the new Engage survey. Great thing about this view as well is when you're in the content library, what you'll notice is that if a survey has KDA active or it's KDA supported, it's going to list that here for you. So if you're ever curious, and as we keep going and add more availability and more surveys, you'll be able to view and see which ones have KDA analysis supported and which ones don't. So obviously we're going to pick this one. We simply select it. We'll have a list of all the questions. And one thing you'll notice too is not only the questions outlined which one is an outcome, which one is a driver, but you can actually hover over that and get a description of what that means. What I normally recommend for people who are scheduling the survey, especially if this is your first time, take a second and just familiarize yourself with these questions before scheduling it. Just have a quick look through, make sure you understand them, make sure this is something you're going to be happy sending out. Once you've made that decision, you simply come up to the top. Again, we'll let you know this is going to support key driver analysis, and then you simply hit schedule. Choose the survey type. We're going to choose either anonymous, confidential, or visible. It'll work in any of them. You don't have to choose one of them for this survey to work. In this regard, we're going to use anonymous. Of course, if you have any
one quick thing. Oh, sorry. One quick thing I wanted to jump in and point out, though, with the confidential, you do get the benefit of having, if you've entered in those attributes, you get to see the demographics, which Sam can tell you more about. But it's really cool to be able to see, for example, if people who have less tenure, so maybe they've been there less than 2 years, if they're responding differently than people who have more tenure.
And the key thing about the confidential as well is it's only available for super admins to pull that data. So if there's concerns about, well, I don't want my other admins seeing that, I just want me to see it, and you're maybe concerned about choosing confidential over anonymous, only super admins have the ability to pull the additional attributes and demographic information that Dr. Was is talking about. So you should feel at ease doing that. I also saw a question just came through.
I'm chatting to Denise now, so I'll give her a response because it's kind of about her specific survey.
Understood. Cool. So yes, just as before, we've chosen a template. Again, we are here now looking at the survey, and this is to the points that people have made where we can make changes to the survey. We don't really want to make changes, and that's one of the reasons why we have this warning sticker up here saying this template supports key driver analysis. We're just reminding you really quickly that these surveys and these questions, they're science-backed. The questions are chosen intentionally, they're worded intentionally, and that if you are going to make any changes at all, they should be very minimal and should surely only stick to changing, for example, I speak positively of the company I work for to others, maybe changing that to I speak positively of TINYpulse to others, for example, if we were to do it internally. And really the editing shouldn't go beyond that, or else we do kind of run the risk of making changes to the survey that were not intended when this was built. Again, we're going to hit next. We set the audience. We're going to always recommend you send it to as large an audience as possible. Again, this goes back to who can use it. We want to make sure that the data you're getting is as scientifically valid as possible. And that does mean having a larger audience, better responses. If you do want to break this down for others, I don't believe that feature is available yet. You might be stuck with just having the ability to send it to all company at the moment. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as you're all getting used to KDA, you're all getting used to this new engagement survey, because it'll give you a lot more data, first of all, but also the data will be more valid as well. I'm not going to go through too much of the rest of setting up a survey, but of course, as usual, you can select a date and time to run that survey. Some of you may have some ideas or questions about what I recommend for how long should you keep this open for. I would recommend stick to whatever cadence you're used to. If you are on a weekly cadence, maybe extend that to a week and a half or 2 weeks. But if you are on a 2 week or 1 month cadence, there's nothing wrong with sticking to the cadence you are comfortable with and that your employees are used to as well. Again, with timing too, timing is really up to you. We normally recommend sending out at 10 a.m. local time. It just is when we tend to see the best responses. But again, we want to give you the tools and let you decide what works best for your org. So if this is something you do want to roll out and you want to sit down with the organization and have a discussion before it rolls out, feel free to have that discussion and then schedule the survey to go out after that time as well. One final thing I want to point out as well is you can make this repeat if you wish. Otherwise, you would simply go ahead, hit next, personalize your email survey template. Again, for those of you using TINYpulse, this is going to look very familiar to you. And then finally hit next, and then you'll go ahead and be able to save that survey along with all the details you've just gone and entered. Any questions before we move on to reviewing the responses for that on how to find this survey and how to schedule this survey? I just want to make sure we have that mechanical action down. We do try to make it as easy as possible. So again, you can simply go into Manage Survey tab here and create the survey and do it this way. Though I do recommend, especially for your first time, and especially if you haven't done this prior, going into the content library, going to the templates, and then looking this way. Because first of all, you're going to be able to see a bunch of other templates that might spark some interest, but mostly because you'll be able to see which ones have KDA supported. And this engagement survey, of course, is the first one, but we do plan to roll out future ones in the coming months and so on and so forth.
Sam, we have a question from Tammy asking, if you repeat the survey, how often do you determine that you should repeat it? Typically, we think of this as an annual survey. Also, one thing you want to be careful about is not over surveying your employees. So I would recommend typically that it would be annual. However, you could adjust as needed. And then also you may end up doing follow-up surveys as well. For example, if you identify through the key driver analysis, there's a particular area and you want to get some details about how to address that area, that's where you might have a separate survey after.
Yeah, and I will also say that's a great question, and you're also teeing us up perfectly for next week when we jump into progress plans. We'll be talking about that a lot more. Also, we have only about 15 minutes left, so if there's no further questions, I'm going to quickly jump in and show you what KDA and responses look like.
Yeah, let's get into the results because I think that's the most fun part
Yeah.
about this.
Absolutely. So of course, we just simply go to responses, under engage, under surveys. We find that engagement survey we want to look at, and then here we go. Before we move down, these three boxes up here, they're going to look very, very similar to your boxes if you used TINYpulse before. Simply the details, participation broken down by segment, and focus areas broken down by segment. The big kicker, though, is going to be further down here with the key driver analysis. So before we dive in and view the full analysis details, we're going to give you a quick just summary of what's going on, what some questions are, what subcategories they fall into, the score they've received, and the impact they have. And we can get into that in a little bit, but I also want to point out this engagement index question or score right here, which again is the average of the first 5 outcome questions in the survey.
And what will be great with that engagement index is that if you administer the engagement survey year over year, you can actually have a very quick kind of temperature reading on how your employees are responding just by looking at that engagement index. You can see whether it goes up or goes down year over year.
Absolutely. And again, to the point, I believe Tammy just made about how often should you ask this question?
Mhm.
I mean, annually, I think would be a great way, but we're going to get more into that next week in the progress plans question. So when I click into few key driver analysis features, we get a much more in-depth view of the data we've received. So first of all, again, we get the index question here. We'll see the previous score, overall benchmark, and industry benchmark. For those not in the know, overall is everyone on TINYpulse, what their average score is. Industry benchmark is just the average score of the accounts in your industry. See, 2 questions just really quickly came through.
Yeah, one we're kind of answering now, Sherry's question, whether we have the ability to compare their organization scores to other organizations.
And I'll take the second one from Denise too. Oh, sorry, another question just came through as well. Where'd I go? Is it an extra cost to add this? So it's live for everyone 75 active users and over. I don't believe it's an extra cost. That will be something I would suggest you talk with your CSM or CSA about. They'll have more details specific to your account and be able to help assist with that as well. And I saw another question also came through. Okay. Can't see much out of. Do you see that question, Laura?
The one from, is it Denise? We're asking about baseline versus the engagement survey.
Yes. So you did miss a little bit. This webinar is recorded, so of course you can always go back and view that as well. But to give you a quick overview, this is something we're moving to away from the baseline because this is more scientifically backed. We believe the data you're going to receive from this, the feedback, the follow-up items you can get and actions you can get from this new engagement survey is just so much more powerful than the baseline. And also, you won't have to do the data analysis yourself. We've done it for you. And that's why we are recommending the new engagement survey over the baseline.
Yeah, for example, baseline won't give you the recommended priorities to improve. You won't have that clearly laid out in this way. So baseline actually looks at those key drivers and how they're connecting to the outcomes to come up with these recommendations.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue into actually showing you this graph down here on all the key drivers. So you see here, it says recommended priorities to improve engagement index. So how do we get these? Now, why are we recommending these 3 questions in these 3 categories and saying they have such a high impact or extremely high impact on the overall engagement index score? And that really comes down to this graph here. So first of all, I want to show that it's broken up into 4 quadrants: prioritize, celebrate, maintain, and review, and has 2 axes as well. the impact of outcome from very low to extremely high, as well as the score. So we can see here everyone scored between a 3 and a 5. So that's going to be the bottom axis there, while the impact is going to show here as well. And just before we jump in and show you everything here as well, I want to point out this categories filter. Again, all our key drivers roll up into one of these 7 science-backed categories. And by selecting over one of these categories, you can actually go ahead and highlight each individual KDA or key driver within each of these categories to review. But yeah, essentially what we're doing here, and I think Laura might be able to explain a little bit better than I, but we're graphing these questions based on not only what you should do with them, either maintain, review, celebrate, or prioritize, but also how high of an impact they have on your overall score in the engagement index.
Yeah, and so if you take, for example, you can visually look at this and see that orange dot right there at the top, that has the highest impact. And so you can find that, okay, effective management and them giving clear goals and expectations is one of the highest impact key drivers. And so that's one you would really want to target. The other two are not quite as high impact, but you can take a look at them and see, for example, that one relates to effective management as well. And let's see, I bet that other one's effective management. So
Wow,
they're
yeah.
all around effective management for prioritize. And so what I'd recommend is actually, this is where you'd think about doing a training, and you would actually roll all of these kind of items to prioritize into a training and an initiative in order to improve. And what's nice is that you can pulse to make sure that your training's been effective. And in the following year, you can check it again with your engagement survey to see, is this another problem to diagnose or has it improved?
Mm-hmm. And just to point out as well, the 3 questions we've asked you here to recommend prioritizing to improve your engagement index, we're pulling them from this graph, and these are those 3 questions. Again, we also show you which ones you should celebrate, just as easy, just hover over them: growth and development, health and wellness, and health and wellness. So these are all things we should celebrate and be promoting to the company. While we also have some things we maybe need to review. They don't have a huge impact of outcome, but they did score on the lower side. And then things to maintain, which is they had a higher score than average, but don't have a huge impact of the outcome on the index score. But Laura, can you explain to us what these little gray ones down here are and what does non-significant mean?
I'd be happy to. Yeah. So this is a kind of topic that we've touched on a little bit, is this idea of non-significance. And what it means is that you might have a key driver here and there that actually in your organization doesn't tie into or significantly predict the outcomes. And one big thing that I should note is that this key driver analysis isn't one size fits all. It's customized to your organization. So there might be some items that don't matter so much. So for example, training may not be as important, especially if, like, let's say your employees are really kind of high in tenure and they are really well trained already. That may not be a great predictor. And what that tells us is that you don't really need to take any action with those types of items. And it's kind of nice because with this, you can tell, here's what I need to prioritize, here's what I need to keep an eye on in terms of kind of reviewing. But then these other items, these 2 right here, I don't need to worry about those. I'll check them again next year, but for now, they don't have a significant impact on our outcomes. So it's kind of one more thing off your plate.
Absolutely. So this is, again, we want to give you guys the tools. We want to give you guys as much good data as we can to make recommendations to you. And of course, these key driver details here are meant to do that, right? We do make it a little bit easier and show you what we believe you should focus on, as well as the impact that it will have on the engagement index. And of course, we're going to go over next week how we can consistently track that and see how we're doing with that. But we also want to show you some good stuff too, like things you can celebrate, things you can maintain, and also some stuff you want to review and potentially work out a little bit more as well. So this is, in essence, the key driver details of the engagement survey. I'm very excited about it, to be honest. I think this is going to be a huge help to a lot of our admins who just don't really know which way to go, especially for a lot of people who are a bit newer to TINYpulse. One of the big questions I always get is, what do I ask? What do I do? And we're hoping that this survey, or we know that this survey will not only kind of cover that gap for you, but also give you things to focus on, give you things to prioritize, and also find some things for you to celebrate as well. Because it's not always about negative feedback or things you need to change. Sometimes it's about celebrating some positivity in your culture and in your organization as well.
That was a great summary. I think we should go ahead and pause here for any questions, and also let Andrew go ahead and send out the link for the feedback survey so that you can give us feedback and kind of tell us what else you'd like to learn through that survey.
Actually, the feedback survey is automatic. So once you leave your session
awesome.
today, folks, you'll get that survey. Don't close your browser. I know we'll leave a couple minutes at the end here so you can enter that. But please do fire away with questions for Sam and Dr. Voiles.
I will say we have only one more slide after this, so we're nearing the end, guys. So any questions you have, please let us know. Thank you so much, Virginia. Glad you could have attended.
Certainly. Feel free to hit up Sam by email afterwards.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot of folks got to jump as well, but Sam, drop your email, and then yeah, we'll start to wrap up here.
Absolutely. I'm going to put my email in the chat for anyone who is curious. Please feel free to reach out with any and all questions. I really have no filter, and I'll talk about anything you wish to talk about, especially if it comes, send that to the wrong person, especially if it comes to anything we've just gone over here. Happy, of course, to discuss it. Again, if you know who your CSA is or your CSM is, please feel free to reach out to them. They'll be more than able to walk you through what you've already talked about, but also able to give you an idea if you don't meet those minimum requirements, how we can get you there and how we can help. So,
right on.
Right on.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Yes, the last thing we do need to talk about is next week. So we've talked about this a little bit. I know we're right on time, so I'll try to wrap up as quick as possible. I've been told I talk a little bit too much. But next week, we're going to be going over progress plans. I know some of you have discovered progress plans this week already. I've talked to a few of you already today and yesterday and the day before about progress plans. But we're going to go into a bit more of a deep dive next week. You know, today we talked about the engagement survey, KDA. Next week, we're going to talk about what you can do with those KDA recommendations. How can you automate improving engagement? And we're going to really deep dive into what progress plans are, the future progress plans, why we've created them, and why we think they are one of the best things TINYpulse has come out with recently.
Fantastic. And just a quick teaser, the following week, we'll have Dr. Voiles back for another leadership live session. We're going to go into stay interviews, popular topic from past webinars. We'll jump into how to do those the right way. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you next time for Tiny Webinars. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn for invites to events just like this. And till then, to happy employees. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all.